Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free movie review of The Wild Robot. I've been waiting to talk about this movie for a while now. I'm recording this just a couple of days removed from watching the movie. It's already crushed at the box office. It is from one of my favorite writer-directors in animation, Chris Sanders, a friend of the podcast. If you're not familiar with the work of Chris Sanders, all I need to say is he is the creator and voice of Stitch in Lilo and Stitch. That entire story came from his mind. So with just that movie alone, he has cemented himself in the world of animation as being one of the best to do it. Chris Sanders knows how to evoke emotion. And The Wild Robot is based on a book series, which is a trilogy. In this movie, you have a character named Roz, who is a robot who gets shipwrecked on this island. You have these otters who discover this huge, big parcel that this robot was in. They start messing with it and activate this robot. Roz is programmed to finish and complete its task. It is a helper robot, so anybody who needs help, they are there to help, and they're not going to leave until you are satisfied with your performance of your Roz robot. She crash lands on this planet, and there's all these different animals there, and Roz is just trying to find her purpose, going up to different animals, seeing who needs help, but everybody rejects her because they think she is a monster. They think she is there to kill them. Then she stumbles upon this orphan baby gosling, and suddenly this baby gosling becomes her new task. And what does she have to do? She has to make sure that the gosling is able to swim, is able to find food, and is able to fly by the fall. So in turn, becoming the gosling's mother. And before I get into the amazing voice acting, all of the emotion I felt in this movie, let's start with the visual aspect. One of the most visually stunning animated movies in the last 5 years. It is up there with the Into the Spider-Verse movies as far as making you feel like you are watching a storybook come to life. And I think that's the animation I'm drawn to right now. It is combining different animation styles to make something very bright and vibrant. And much like the Into the Spider-Verse movies, where they essentially made a comic book come to life, those first two movies essentially look like you took the pages of a comic book and pulled them right out and animated them, combined a lot of different animation styles to do that. That movie is on an entirely different level, on an entirely different budget. Along those same lines, that's what The Wild Robot did. Took these almost watercolor illustrations from the book and brought it to life in a breathtaking way. With amazing lighting, amazing character design, and every single frame in The Wild Robot I could take a still from and put it up on this wall because it looks so beautiful. And I often think that the actual animation style in a kids movie often gets like way down on the equation. You think, let's just slap a bunch of things together, the kids won't notice. This movie proves to me that you can make a better animated movie that kids are going to enjoy and they are going to pay attention to. This movie looks absolutely stunning from beginning to end. And it's almost a little bit like you have to wrap your head around the animation style because it looks so unique. The movie feels so different, but by the very end of it, you are completely in that world, completely submersed. And very rarely in animated movies do I not want them to end. And that is really one of the only negative things I can say about this movie is I wish it would have been longer. And I also loved how Roz weathered as the movie went along. Started out fresh out the box, and throughout the movie gets a little bit more worn down. You get all of the dirt on her, the moss start to grow around her, and that really shows the evolution of her character and all that she goes through and what the message of this movie is of how an adopted parent or even a single parent goes through so much for their kids to succeed. In Roz's case, literally putting herself on the brink of death in order to have this baby gosling live a better life. And that brings me to my next and probably most important part of this movie is the emotional punch that this movie packs. And from the very beginning of the movie, I loved how it committed to teaching kids about death and embracing what actually happens in nature, what actually happens in the real world, because at the root of the story, it's all about survival, sadness, and hope. There's some joy in there too, but it felt almost like, oh, they're really going here. They're going to talk about how, you can die in the wild, how all these animals are trying not to be eaten, and how the food chain works. And that felt really refreshing to me in a kids movie because I would say in the last 5 to 6 animated movies that I've seen in theaters geared towards kids, everything is always rooted in happiness. There is a little bit of conflict and turmoil, but it's like you shave down all of the edges so that nobody gets hurt. And I can understand that, especially for younger kids, which there were some younger kids in this audience that maybe the overall emotional level was maybe a little bit too advanced for them. Because I think some kids go into an animated movie probably 3 or 4 years old, maybe 5 years old, and they just want to see colorful characters doing fun things that they can laugh at and want to watch over and over again. But then you have kids who are a little bit older. I go back to a time where I was taking in movies like Toy Story, The Lion King in the late 90s, where I was becoming more in tune with my emotions, and movies for me were a source of information and a source of me being able to learn lessons that my parents could not teach me. Whenever it came to learning about the more emotional things like death, love, things you should probably be taught to by your parents, mine struggled a little bit sitting me down and talking about some of those things. So I would go to movies to be able to learn about these emotions and how to process them. I go back to watching The Lion King at 4, 5, 6 years old and learning about death. I watched Toy Story and I learned about the feeling of being abandoned. And it's the power of filmmaking to make stories that are going to resonate with kids. Talking 25 years later, I'm sitting here still talking about how those movies changed my life. And I think that is what The Wild Robot is going to be for kids. You are going to remember this movie after seeing it in theaters with your parents. And that is so important because I often feel that in animation, especially right now, there was a trailer that played before The Wild Robot. I won't say the name of the movie, I won't even say the studio, but I will say it had a voice cast with just a bunch of random celebrities. The animation itself looked lifeless, and it looked like they just dumped some money onto this movie without any real intention of making something that was going to resonate with kids. They just want to cash in. Little cash grab. You throw out this random animated movie, throw some celebrities in there, have them do a couple interviews about it, and you maybe make a quick buck. But a kid is going to forget about that movie as soon as they leave the theater. They're not going to want to rewatch that movie. The Wild Robot is not that. It is going to stay in the minds of kids. They're going to want to watch this movie again. They're going to want to see a sequel. And hopefully, being that it is a trilogy, you have the books to base it off of, that it gets an entire series of movies. The other thing I loved about it is it had this very childlike sense of mystery that even me as an adult was very enticed by. I didn't read the book going into this, so I didn't know what was going to happen, but it was putting together the pieces. And for a movie geared towards kids, I didn't find it to be that predictable, especially since it was dealing with things like death and despair that I didn't know how everything was going to turn out because they don't really paint it in a certain way that everything is going to play off nicely for every single character. Again, won't spoil the end for you, but you find out from the very beginning on how Roz even discovers Bright Bill, knowing that probably anything can happen. And as soon as she discovers the other fox of knowing like, hey, death is right around the corner, you know that they're in the wild and all these elements are not being strayed away from. Death is always just right there, hanging over your head, much like it is in adult life. Isn't that what we all worry about? But it's this sense of mystery that, for me, I put myself more in the position of Roz, of now they have this kid who is their responsibility and they want to see them succeed. They are an adopted single parent just trying to do the best for their kid and not really having all the tools and not knowing how to process emotions because they are a robot, but trying to dig deep and feel something. And it really made me think about my mom and all the struggles she had to go through to make sure that me and my brother and sister had what we needed. And this movie really shines a light on the toll that raising kids has on parents, how much it wears you down physically, how much it wears you down mentally, and how it can just drain you of everything. But just knowing that your kid can just have a maybe 1% chance at making it alive makes it all worth it. So it is a big commentary on motherhood, and me not being female, I totally grasped onto that and made me want to call my mom immediately after leaving the theater and thanking her for every single thing she had ever done for me. I think for a younger audience, they're probably going to see themselves a little bit more as Bright Bill, because Bright Bill is trying to navigate this world that they don't fit in with, because they have a parent who is being described by the other people on this desert island as a monster. And Bright Bill is raised in a way that's not very traditional. All the other geese find Bright Bill to be an outcast, a weirdo, and they beat him up for that. So I think the younger audience is going to grasp on to that, whether they feel like that or maybe they've been treating a kid unfairly just for being different, which I hope the movie benefits both sides. For those who are more like Bright Bill, feeling like, oh, that's somebody like me, I can identify with that. And somebody who identifies as maybe one of the bullies think, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I don't know the entire story here and don't know what they are going through. And maybe I should be a little bit more conscious of learning about somebody who doesn't look like me. And again, I don't want to make it sound like this movie is completely depressing and you're going to be crying the whole time. I just want to put an emphasis on we shouldn't stray away from exposing kids to sadness. It is a very real emotion, and sadness isn't a bad thing to feel. You're supposed to feel those emotions and learn how to process those emotions. And I think if I learned that at a younger age, I probably wouldn't be in some of the positions I am now, where it is hard for me to speak about the things going on inside here unless I'm talking about it in a movie review. So I think that is just the most polarizing feeling from the movie, but there are a lot of fun moments and a lot of sci-fi as well. And I've said all these great things about this movie without even talking about the amazing voice acting. Lupita Nyong'o plays Roz, who does a fantastic job of showing the evolution of the character, going from being a factory set robot to a fully fleshed out mom by the end of this movie. You hear it in her voice. That is top tier voice acting, much like you would if you were on screen the entire time. Lupita Nyong'o does that with her voice. Across the board, to me, it felt like everybody really understood the assignment, got into that vocal booth, really packed in the emotion, and really had fun with the characters. Whether it was Pedro Pascal as Fink, Catherine O'Hara as the mom possum, Mark Hamill as the big brown bear, or Ving Rhames as Thunderbolt. What I really look for in any movie, especially one with a lot of action and adventure, even in animation, I always want to find that real triumphant moment. That moment in a movie where I want to stand up in my seat and cheer and applaud, even though that's not really me in a movie. I find clapping to be a little bit cheesy and a little bit forced at times, but I want that feeling that makes me feel excited that if I was a clapper or a cheerer, that I would want to get up out of my seat. That big excitement moment that makes you think, yes, finally. I always look for that in movies. Often find that a lot in superhero movies, not as much as of late, but this movie had that. There's one moment in particular where Maren Morris wrote a song specifically for this movie. When that song hits, I felt something so warm take over my body. And it felt like in that moment, I was watching something truly special. I got emotional, not in a way that I was going to cry because it was sad, but just because I was overwhelmed with this happiness and feeling like, oh, how could something that's just a bunch of frames and moving pictures and actors voicing make me feel like this? And that felt really special. And that is the power of filmmaking, the power of animation, because if this was a live action movie, by no means would it have the same effect. And that is why I'm such a huge proponent of animation, because it can take your mind to places that you never knew that were possible. And The Wild Robot, even though it's based on a book, it isn't a huge IP. It's not like it's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or Cat in the Hat. So it's also inspiring to me that a movie like this that's not based on a toy or based on something that everybody knows, that feels like a remake or part of a franchise that's already established, can still exist, come out, be number one at the box office opening weekend, and have not only people like me ranting and raving about it, but it also connecting with the audience that it was intended for. When it comes to the score, it is almost so close to being perfect. I've never rated an animated movie a 5 out of 5. I take my ratings very, very seriously. And even though I love this movie with so much of my heart, I still couldn't give it that perfect score. It is almost there, but it is a strong 4.5 out of 5 Goslings, almost there at the 5 out of 5. And maybe upon that second or third rewatch for me, or maybe if they do make that sequel, they do make that part 3, part 2 or maybe part 3 could hit there at that 5 out of 5 for me. So maybe I'm saying this in hopes that they do make more movies, build a nice little franchise, but for The Wild Robot, I give it 4.5 out of 5.